Hello and welcome once again to Cave Cat's movie and TV reviews. Once more with your favorite host, the one and only Cave Cat. Today, it's time for us to go back in time again, but this time way back to 1972, back when the Peanut specials were still in their prime. This was also around the time that Charles M. Schulz had penned and screenplayed his second full-length Peanuts film after the success of his first film, A Boy Named Charlie Brown. That film ended up being Snoopy Come Home, which was released in August of 1972. For those of you who don't know, during the time that Schulz was still alive while the Peanuts comics and specials were still in production, there were 4 feature-length films that Schulz had wrote and executive produced, which are A Boy Named Charlie Brown from 1969, Snoopy Come Home from 1972, Race for Your Life Charlie Brown from 1977, and Bon Voyage Charlie Brown and Don't Come Back from 1980. This was even years before Blue Sky Studios produced the Peanuts movie back in 2015, 15 years after Schulz's death. But anyway, out of all 4 of the original Peanuts theatrical films that Schulz worked on, this was the one that I grew up with the most because I would often watch it a lot ever since I was very young, and it ended up becoming one of my childhood favorite animated films that I still watch to this day, alongside All Dogs Go to Heaven, which I previously did a review of. With all that out of the way, it's time to get this review started. The film follows Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and the rest of the gang going about their usual business, though Charlie Brown has been annoyed at the fact that Snoopy has been acting rather independently as of late, not even showing any regard at how much Charlie Brown provides for him. At the same time, Snoopy also ends up receiving a letter from a young girl named Lila, imploring him to come visit her while she's in the hospital, which is what Snoopy does, much to the confusion and frustration of Charlie Brown. Although around that time, Snoopy has also been dealing with various problems, such as the other kids getting annoyed with his aggressive attitude, which there's actually a reason for that, which I will get to right now. Throughout the film, there's a running gag where Snoopy ends up getting hampered by the fact that certain places that he goes to don't allow dogs, starting when he gets thrown off the beach due to having a new rule about not allowing dogs on the beach. All of this ends up being accompanied by the late Thurl Ravenscroft singing, "No dogs allowed." Although speaking of singing, much like A Boy Named Charlie Brown, this film also contains various songs, but the songs in this film were actually written by the Sherman Brothers themselves, whom a lot of you may remember for writing songs for various Disney films, like The Parent Trap, The Sword and the Stone, Mary Poppins, the Winnie the Pooh featurettes, The Jungle Book, The Aristocats, and Bedknobs and Broomsticks, along with several non-Disney films like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Charlotte's Web. Also, aside from Charlie Brown and Snoopy, the film includes a lot of the familiar characters that we all know, like Linus, Lucy, Schroeder, Peppermint Patty, who actually has a speaking role in this film as opposed to her cameo in A Boy Named Charlie Brown, and Sally, while other characters like Violet, Patty, Frida, Pigpen, Franklin, Shermie, and several others only have small cameos in the film. And speaking of the characters, this film actually marks the animated debut of a character that first made his debut in the comic all the way back in 1966, but wasn't officially named until 4 years later in 1970. That would be none other than Snoopy's bird friend, Woodstock. And much like how he was portrayed in the comics, Woodstock is a rather clumsy flyer with the inability to properly fly right side up, even running into things while doing so. But despite this, he still remains loyal to Snoopy no matter what. In fact, he even gets to join Snoopy in his journey to go out and see Lila in the hospital. From all the times that I've watched this film as I grew up, I was able to notice quite a few things about it. Despite the fact that this film still has the trademark Peanuts humor that Schulz is famous for, it's also actually pretty somber with a good amount of tear-jerking moments, especially regarding how Charlie Brown has been dealing with Snoopy being gone for so long, and even what Snoopy and Woodstock have been going through in their journey to see Lila. In fact, speaking of Lila, this film actually reveals quite a few things that we didn't even know about when the comic first started all the way back in 1950. For starters, while a lot of loyal readers of the Peanut strips have known for a long time that Snoopy was Charlie Brown's dog, this film reveals that Snoopy actually used to belong to Lila months before he was adopted by Charlie Brown. The reason for this was because Lila and her family only owned Snoopy for a short time, but were forced to return him to the Daisy Hill Puppy Farm, which is where he grew up, when Lila and her family had to move to an apartment that didn't allow dogs. And that was also around the time that Charlie Brown's family adopted Snoopy, and like Linus said, "You gotta use dog, Charlie Brown." However, when this aspect of Snoopy's life was later re-explored years later in the special Snoopy's Reunion, They gave him a slightly different backstory than what was established in this film, being that while they still focused on Lila adopting Snoopy, they changed it so that Lila and her family were already living in an apartment at the time, but the apartment complex had gotten a new rule that no dogs were allowed, which was what drove Lila and her family to return Snoopy. And that was when Charlie Brown came to the Daisy Hill Puppy Farm to adopt Snoopy as his own. Despite this little hiccup in continuity, I actually quite enjoyed Snoopy's reunion, to tell you the truth. But back to Snoopy Come Home. The way that they handled the situation with Snoopy leaving Charlie Brown to see Lila can definitely hit close to home for anyone who's had a friend or loved one leave them or move away. From what I heard, the production for this film came about when Schulz, who had divorced his wife at the time, poured out his feelings and emotions when he penned this film, which a lot of directors, screenwriters, and producers have done that, but I can't think of any at the top of my head at the moment. And despite these feelings of great frustration from Sparky himself, the final product was well loved by everyone when it was released to theaters. Yes, the film is sad with all that Snoopy, Charlie Brown, and the rest of the gang went through when Snoopy was torn between going to live with Lila or staying with Charlie Brown. But like I said before, this film also had quite a good amount of humor to balance out the emotion and heavy-heartedness. As mentioned before, the no dogs allowed running gag may seem overused and a bane to Snoopy during his journey, but it actually does end up working out in Snoopy's favor when, after he arrives at Lila's place, he finds that her apartment complex does have a sign not allowing dogs in the building, which allows him to return to Charlie Brown and the others. However, it does bring up the question of how Lila did not realize this until after Snoopy pointed out to her when she tried inviting him into her place. Did Lila believe that the owners of the complex would change their minds about dogs in the building? Did she forget about that rule while she was in the hospital? I mean, what's going on? But despite this little plot hole, even in spite of all the tearjerkers that are scattered throughout this film, it all gets balanced out with quite a good amount of humor, as I mentioned earlier. In fact, there are actually 4 moments from this film that actually got me to laugh out loud, even to this day. The first one was during the library scene, where after Snoopy had gotten the book about bunnies that he wanted and he's reading the book, he just ends up bursting out into hilariously raucous laughter. I mean, his laugh just sounded hysterical. Granted, it does get him kicked out of the library, which also doesn't allow dogs, but the animation coupled with Snoopy's reaction just makes it even funnier. The second one was the boxing match that Snoopy had with Lucy, followed by his getting kicked out of the library, and especially after having a little spat with Linus over his blanket. It was pretty hilarious and amusing seeing Snoopy boxing against Lucy with the boxing glove over his nose. The third one was during Snoopy and Woodstock's journey to see Lila, where they ended up running afoul of a crazed, pet-obsessed little girl named Clara, even if her name wasn't said at all throughout the entire film, and thus end up going through one slapstick-filled escapade after another to try and escape from her presence, which they succeeded doing after a while. In fact, I've heard quite a lot of people speculate that Clara might possibly be the predecessor to Elmira Duff from Tiny Toon Adventures, being that she's just as obsessed with animals as much as Elmira is. And the final one is when Charlie Brown and Peppermint Patty are at the carnival, and as they're entering through the turnstile, Charlie Brown ends up getting caught in the turnstile and gets dizzy, while Peppermint Patty tells him, "I've seen people get sick on merry-go-rounds and Ferris wheels and roller coasters, but you're the first person I ever met who got sick going through the turnstile." I could go on all day about that, but I won't. And aside from all that, there's also the songs written by the Sherman Brothers, as I also mentioned earlier. Richard and Robert really did a great job moving the plot along with writing the songs for the film, because one minute they're upbeat and bouncy, and the next minute they're incredibly slow, somber, and melancholic. The latter especially when it comes to the songs Do You Remember Me and It Changes. And of course, there's also songs like The Best of Buddies, which can instill great feelings of optimism in anyone who hears it. Despite this, those songs end up getting struck with moments of mood whiplash, as I mentioned before. This film is, without a doubt, the most somber that Charles M. Schulz has ever produced during his lifetime. I mean, sure, his other theatrical films like A Boy Named Charlie Brown, Race for Your Life Charlie Brown, and even Bon Voyage Charlie Brown have pretty sad moments as well, but they're not as sobering as they are in Snoopy Come Home. In all honesty, I would actually put this film up there with Don Bluth's An American Tail, The Land Before Time, and All Dogs Go to Heaven as one of the saddest animated films ever produced. But even in spite of how much of a tearjerker this film is, I still enjoy it as one of my childhood favorites, which is enough to convince me to give this film 9.5 stars. While the Peanuts specials and films still captured the feel of the original Peanuts comics, especially when Schulz was at the helm, A lot of them were loved by fans, while there were others that seemed to be very hit and miss. More infamously, it was Your First Kiss, Charlie Brown. And then there are other specials like Why Charlie Brown Why that ended up covering subjects that you wouldn't find very many animated kid shows covering today, such as the subject of cancer. And there's also the subject of the TV shows The Charlie Brown and Snoopy Show, and even This Is America Charlie Brown, the latter covering a lot of different historical events in America's history, while the former covered a lot of Peanuts story arcs from the comics from the 60s and 70s. Though A Boy Named Charlie Brown did adapt the whole spelling bee arc from the mid 1960s, even if it did change it so that instead of getting out for misspelling one word, Charlie Brown manages to make it to the national finals, though he still gets out for misspelling one word. And I did mention the Peanuts movie before, which is actually getting a sequel, but not really a sequel per se, even in spite of Blue Sky's closure back in 2021 ever since the Disney-Fox merger. Like a lot of people, I'm a little bit nervous about how a sequel to the Peanuts movie is going to turn out, even after other future animated films like Toy Story 5 and Shrek 5 were announced, and even worrying about the animation style being changed in regards to the latter. I mean, yeah, Shrek and Donkey do look a little bit different, but not quite as bad as a lot of people say. And in regards to a new Peanuts film, I can bet that a lot of people are going to worry about if the art style will change from the 2015 film or if it'll stay the same as it was before. As mentioned before, we don't know all the facts, so only time will tell. Well, people, that's it for this episode of Cave Cats movie and TV reviews. As I keep saying, don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more episodes, or whatever video that'll come your way. Until next time, see you in the future!